A book that I'm ordering about 15 copies of, just for friends. And it's one of those books you order for a friend that doesn't slap them upside the head. It's one of those books that you give to a friend, especially if they've gone through a difficult time or they're looking back at a difficult time, because this thing is flat out, doggone encouraging. And just really, really sharp stuff. So by a guy named Tim Hansel. Tim Hansel has a ministry called Summit in Colorado. And they do extreme sports, mostly mountain climbing, those kind of things. And they take groups up into the mountains for days at a time. And he was kind of a man's man. He was kind of one of those guys who was just, and let's climb a mountain, let's jump on a buffalo, that kind of thing. And he was climbing with a friend, just taking some time off relaxing, a 2-day trip where they're going to hike up into the mountains and then make a really steep climb up a ravine, up a sheer face of a cliff. And it was beautiful weather, but there was ice. And if you know anything about ice, it changes in a matter of minutes on a mountain. With sun, with wind, it could be slippery one minute, really wet and slippery the next. And he was on a face several hundred feet up outside this cliff. And for some reason, his safety rope went and he fell several hundred feet and landed on his back on a round rock. And he thought, I'm going to die, I'm dead, and he was out. The guy who saw him fall, his partner, thought, he's gone. There's just no way he would survive. Well, his partner gets down to him, took him about a half hour. When he got down there, this guy who had fallen, Tim, was just waking up. He told him not to move, and after a while, Tim says, I feel okay. And he sits up, and he's got this tingling sensation through his body, which you'd expect something. And he goes, I think I'm all right. And they laughed about it. Oh my gosh, that's a miracle. I just saw you fall. You should be dead. And the guy said, well, let's start hiking our way back out. I don't want to climb right now. I don't feel that good. It took 2 days to get out. But the bottom line is when he fell and he hit that rock, it compressed his body 2 inches. He lost 2 inches of his height in the fall. And it just really screwed him up. And this happened about 30 years ago. He lives every day in intense pain. And this is his book called You Gotta Keep Dancing. And great stuff, great book. If you know anything about me, I measure books by how much highlighting I do. This one is kind of colorful. And but I want to read you a couple things as we start today, and I hope that's okay. If it's not, too bad. This is what it says. In the movie Oh God Book 2, George Burns, you gotta love George Burns, is playing the part of God. He is asked by a tiny girl why bad things happen. Our topic of the last couple weeks. Burns thoughtfully considers a question and then replies. Listen to what God says, played by Burns. That's the way the system works. Have you ever seen an up with a down without a down, a front without a back, a top without a bottom? You can't have one without the other. I discovered that if I take away sad, then I take away happy too. They go together. Then with a wry smile, he adds, if somebody has a better idea, I hope they put it in the suggestion box. And life's like that. Life's like that. I like this verse, also in the book, from Isaiah. First of all, he just says, Tim says, one of my favorite verses. This is what he says, I'll go a paragraph earlier. I recently discovered that there are 365 fear nots in the Bible, one for every day. Could it be that it's to remind us daily that we need not fear the difficulties that all of us eventually face in life? One of my favorites is Isaiah 43. God begins by boldly saying, fear not, for I have redeemed you, I have called you by name, you are mine. And that is the essential reason why we need not fear. Then Isaiah continues, when you pass through the waters, I will be with you. When you pass through the rivers, they will not sweep over you. When you walk through the fire, and he notes, it doesn't say when or if you walk through the fire, it says when you walk through the fire. Remember in the series we said it rains, okay? Life happens, okay? Storms come, and now he's saying, and there's fire, okay? And it's going to get hot. When you walk through the fire, you will not be burned. The flames will not set you ablaze. You are precious, you are honored in my sight. I love you, do not be afraid, for I am with you. And then one more quote. I like this. Read by a theologian by the name of Buechner. Life. The temptation is always to reduce it to size. A bowl of cherries, a rat race, amino acids. Even to call it a mystery smacks of reductionism. Life is a mystery. It is the mystery. As far as anybody seems to know, the vast majority of things in the universe do not have life whatsoever. Sticks, stones, stars, space, they simply are. A few things are and are somehow aware of it. They have broken through into something. Something has broken through into them. Even a jellyfish, a butternut squash, they're in it with us. We're all in it together in this. Life is it. Life is with. Then he said this, after hearing a theologian speak. He said, there's only one miracle, and it is life. Have you wept at anything during the past year? Has your heart beat faster at the sight of a young beauty? Have you thought seriously about the fact that someday you are going to die? More often than not, do you really listen when people are speaking to you instead of just waiting for your turn to speak? Is there anybody you know in whose place, if one of you had to suffer great pain, would volunteer themselves? If your answer to all or most of these questions is no, chances are you're dead. And life is, as we've said many times, hard. Remember that statement that we said, write on a piece of paper, stick it on the refrigerator? Life is hard, then you die. But it is also a joy. In this series, and where we're at now and have been the last couple of weeks, we've been looking for some answers to some hard questions that we all face at different times. What do we do when life hurts? Why do bad things happen to good people? Why do good things happen to jerks? But most of all, why me? Because that's the question that most of us ask when things don't go our way or when things are incredibly difficult. And those questions, and others like them, actually flow out of a larger question that all of us will wrestle throughout our lives. And it's this question, and I've kind of elongated because I want you to read along with me. It's this. If God is all good, I like that lightning rod. If God is all good, all loving, and if God is all powerful, and if God is omniscient, that is, has complete or unlimited awareness, knowledge and understanding, and if God is able to perceive all things, including the past, present, and future, then why is the world full of evil? It's interesting, evil is a word that people don't like to toss around at all. In fact, our media uses it very, very, very seldom. It's interesting to me that the subject came up, the one that I most recently remember where the word evil was tossed all over the place, was the Newtown tragedies. When a guy took 2 handguns, walked in, and took out, how many kids? How many children? 5? It was 15, 20. It was insane. And it's rare. It is a rare thing indeed when the media uses the word evil. Because when you acknowledge evil, then you have to acknowledge good. And then you get into a discussion that most people, especially media, doesn't want to get into. But there was no other word for it, was there? It was evil. For the next 2 messages, at least, we want to talk about this issue, the problem of evil. When it comes up a conversation or a discussion or a message is given on the topic, there's kind of a weird thing that happens. Because when we talk about evil, people all start having this kind of thing goes on because they're thinking of angels and demons, battles in the cosmic places. We think about the force and the dark side. We think about this angel on one shoulder and the devil on the other, trying to battle to make us make wrong choices or good choices. And we get uncomfortable with it. But I want to ask you for the next few minutes, if you would, just hang with me. Hang with me. The first thing I want to say that I want us to understand is this. Evil is always concrete. Evil is concrete. If we look at evil from the abstract, it's no longer evil. So as we begin our dialogue this morning, what I want to do is I want to refer to and quote and tell you about something that actually happened, that's tangible, that is real, that is a historical event of which is recorded for us. The reason why I do that is because if we talk about it in the abstract, then it's just mere philosophy and opinion. And we can step away from it and distance ourselves from it so we don't have to embrace it. It's reality. So I apologize in advance because this is an illustration that's shared at least one time in our history, and it's fairly graphic, and it's not a warm fuzzy. A guy by the name of Greg Boyd, who I know and have spoken with, he has written several books. He wrote a book called God at War, and he actually records and tells us about the story of Zosha. Zosha is a little girl who was born in Germany in the late 30s. A handful of years before the Nazi Party took control of that country, just a few years before World War II broke out. Zosha's father was a doctor, but he was also a Jew. So when the Nazi party took over and there began to be persecution, their little family was herded along with all the other Jews in Warsaw into a thing that we know, a place that we know as the Warsaw Ghetto. And you might know that story, and they held them there for, I don't know, a year and a half, 2 years, and then they decided they wanted to evacuate and clear out all the Jews who formed that ghetto, and the German war machine pulled that off. Now, if you've seen Schindler's List, they actually depict that in the movie. You already remember it as a very poignant part of the movie, a very gut-wrenching, heartbreaking part of the movie, where Schindler's with a mistress up on the hill, they're riding horses, and they're looking down on the Warsaw Ghetto. And one of the things that they point out, remember, it's a black and white, except for the little girl in the red coat. Do you remember that? And while this chaos is breaking all around her, and people are being put to death and beaten and herded out, and families are being broken up, she's calmly walking through in her little red coat down the streets of her neighborhood. And then the next day or 2 days later, when they're carting out the bodies on these flatbed trailers, remember? Schindler's talking to a couple of soldiers, and he sees the little girl's body stacked in the pile in her bright red coat. And there are some who believe that Schindler, who was the guy that did the movie? I just lost his name. What's it? Spielman. And he actually is using, I said that wrong, but you know who I'm talking about. He actually is referring to this particular story, okay? But it's much more graphic. And so I just want to read to you what happens. The day her family was rounded up with every Jew in their city, her parents were split up. You know, they split them up for male and female. So she ended up being in line with her mother. And they were waiting in line to be loaded into boxcars to be taken to the concentration camps where most of them would perish. Zosha was a stunningly beautiful little girl, somewhere around 5 or 6 years of age. She had diamond-like eyes. As she walked by 2 German soldiers, they took notice of her radiant eyes. One of them remarked, "I could make 2 rings out of those beautiful eyes. One for myself and one for my wife." With that, the guards grabbed little Zosha, yanking her out of the arms of her mother. Her mother was restrained. People started seeing what was happening here, tried to intervene, other Jews, and they were restrained by the soldiers as well. They pinned little Zosha to the ground and proceeded with a knife to pluck this little girl's eyes out. The guards held the crowd back. Everyone was going crazy. The mother was hysterical. But all watched in absolute horror as this atrocity was perpetrated. A little bit later, Zosha would be put to death, and her mother as well. As a dad and grandfather of a handful of grandchildren that age, and as a dad, that's beyond me. Okay, it's beyond me. As a human being, I can't comprehend that, neither can you. But that is a very real, concrete example that captures for us this issue of evil, because there's no other word to describe that except for evil. So when somebody tells you evil doesn't exist, they're talking about in the abstract. And they've distanced themselves from thousands, if not millions, of realities that have happened throughout history that can't be labeled any other way than just bad. Or, well, that was a mistake, they were evil. To debate or dialogue about evil without a very real demonstration of it is cold and personal, intellectual. It's a philosophical debate of words. It basically waters down something horrific to make it a mere philosophical debate, a personal opinion, and what it does for the person who doesn't want to admit it, it tries to pull everybody away from it instead of embracing it in its reality. You never capture the essence of evil unless you look at it and stare it in the face. And for some of us, we've never had evil. We've had hard times, we've had some terrible times, but we've never had evil, okay? But we've seen it. Historian Philip Friedman, who actually is the one who wrote the eyewitness account of that horrific tragedy, who actually survived the concentration camp, he noted that people were praying out loud to God for help when that event was happening. People were crying out for God. And Friedman wondered out loud as he watched, he was being held back by the soldiers as well. He wondered out loud who God would listen to. Would God hear the cries of that little girl, the screams of her distraught mother, and the many who cried out in horror? Would that God hear, would God, not attack God, would God hear and intervene, or would he simply choose to listen to the laughter of the two soldiers who committed this atrocity? And the answer is, God heard both. Zola lost her eyes in her life. Her mother lost her daughter in her life. We know nothing of the fate of the two soldiers who did this terrible deed. But I want to make this statement. This is the problem of evil. This is the problem of evil. Evil leaves us hanging, leaves us wondering, leaves us empty. And this is the question we ask ourselves, and maybe not articulated this way. Why does there seem to be no rhyme or no reason or to apparent blessings and curses of life? And my experience has been simply this, and probably yours too, that most of life seems to be largely arbitrary. There's just no rhyme or reason. Okay? Now, one note, I know you probably think, gee, this is a little bit different, almost seems a little academic. If you know me, it's probably not academic. And it seems very philosophical, but I want to talk about this for just a little bit, this whole issue of evil and how it just seems arbitrary to us. For example, you have two different stories. You have a greedy miser who lives on the edge, or lives to the age of 99, enjoys every penny of his wealth, much too of which he's gained dishonestly. He gets to enjoy all that, lives a long life, and some other godly, wonderful person that we know with a good heart dies before they hit 20. How do you put your arms around that? It makes no sense. It makes no sense to us. How about this? A parent prays for protection for their children. And they choose to be safe, and they're very alert, and they're always cognitive of where their kid is at. And even when they were children, the parent wouldn't even start the car until the kids were placed safely in their car seat, buckled in nice and tight. But they get in a car wreck, and it's not even that big of a wreck, and one of their children dies. And then you have a parent over here, I'm going to put the word in pagan. And the reason I put in pagan means they don't believe in God. The reason I do this is because we in the church tend to have this idea that if we believe in God, then it's going to go well for us. Because we're on God's side, and now God likes us, and now life will be okay, and he'll protect us, you see. So let's say this person over here is pagan. They really don't even... They're not cognitive of their kids. They're all about themselves. They don't even, they take off before the kids got the door shut. All right? And what happens to them? They never so much as have a fender bender, and their children grow up and live long lives. Those things are very, very difficult to put your arms around, to explain. It doesn't seem, the word that we like to use often in this dialogue is fair. Just doesn't seem fair. When things like that happen, or more personally, more pointedly, when you're in the midst of personal tragedy and you're standing by the grave of somebody you deeply love, and your heart is absolutely broken, and there's no words to describe your loss. Let me ask you, for those of you who are of the faith and trust Christ, are the first words that come into your mind, well, God must have a better plan? The answer, if you've not been there, is no. Okay, this must be God's will. That's not what you think. Karen, you shared your story here a couple weeks ago. Did a phenomenal job about losing her husband 7 years ago. Good to see you, Jackson. I think, how old was Jackson when they had, 5 years? 5. Jackson was, he had 3 kids. Jackson was my favorite because he had these glasses and he had this bundle of energy, and he reminded my wife and I of our twins when they were the same age. But when that happens, whether you're 5 or 35 and alone raising 3 boys, you don't think, well, let's just make God's will. That's not what you think. And that trite answer, I've had people tell people in tragedy, it was God's will. I argued with a pastor one time because it made me so mad. We were arguing at this point, and Yvonne and I have a friend in Minnesota who's, I think he was 7 or maybe about 8 or 9, I can't remember his age. He was riding bikes with some friends, and they pulled out from a beach, and they got hit by a driver who had been drinking. And they lost him. And he was a friend of our boys, and it was just such a senseless tragedy. And I just remember sharing that with a guy who was a pastor, and he was saying that everything that happens is God's perfect will. And I told him about that story, and he said, I would have told those parents that that was the perfect will of God. And I told him as a pastor, if you would have told me that story and that was my son, I would have decked you. You would have lost teeth on that one, buddy. Because what you just said, whether you mean it or not, is you just said, God killed my child and it was the best thing. That's the only conclusion I would come to in that pain. Does that make sense? It is such an insult. And yet, most of us have been in situations where people have given us these trite, hollow answers, especially in tragedy. And tragedy is that time when it could have been, it becomes even bigger when it could have been avoided, and especially when it's senseless and somebody has now lost their life because of somebody else's evil actions or irresponsible behavior. And when there's no rhyme or no reason, what does one do with the arbitrariness of evil? And again, that's the problem of evil. So when addressing this question, why does it exist, you've got to always do it in the context of something that is real. Okay? Now, just laying that out. So here's what happens here now, okay? If you think of evil as abstract, it's easy to come up with shallow cliches that have no weight in the face of the hard realities of life. We've had so many classics. I've been in ministry really my whole life because my dad's a pastor, his dad's a pastor. And Yvonne and I, since our married life, we've been in ministry probably, 33, 34 of our 35 years of marriage. People say the stupidest things. We had a friend named Joyce who got cancer, and then she lost a breast, and then so she had one breast, and they were a great family because she was telling us when she'd go get checked that they would cover the breast that she had, and the doctor would examine the space that once had breast. And she said, we're in the car with her and her 2 kids. This is how great this family was. And it was Girl Joyce and Greg and Christy. We're going out for dinner, and she's telling us about this, and she goes, it's really odd because I was sitting there, and then a towel over my breast, and this was exposed, and I didn't feel anything. I didn't feel embarrassed at all because there's nothing there. And her husband said, well, we'll have to remove the other one. You can borrow my swim trunks. Now, we were laughing so hard that he had to pull over the car. I mean, we were dying. I mean, that's just, and we ended up having one other one removed, and we lost her within a year. It's an amazing, amazing, amazing family. But she's in the hospital when she lost her breast, and a friend comes in and said, well, you should just be, this is a Christian's response, you should just be glad that yours not as well endowed as I am, because then it would really be obvious. What the heck? Okay? I had a friend who lost a loved one, and one of the things that somebody told them was, you know, this is God's will. They're happier now. Well, that doesn't help. There's a reason for everything. That doesn't help. How about this one? I have a dear friend who somebody came up to, you know what, it's been long enough, you need just to move on. I just don't do well in those kind of answers, those kind of responses. But when we get these little cliches, and by the time I tell you, most of us, we avoid that. That's why the scripture says, better to go to a house of mourning than a house of feasting. For death is the destiny of every man. The living should take this to heart. And the idea is, one of the things is, when tragedy comes in, when we get stopped in our tracks, there's this thing that happens in our life where we begin to evaluate, what am I living for? When are my choices reflecting what really matters most? Does that make sense? All of a sudden, you realize, worrying about the job, the pressure, paying the bills, all that stuff, it is removed from your tray when the difficult time comes. What people think and how they feel about, they're gone. Because you have to deal with this loss. And you have to deal with the issue of life. And you have to deal with the issue is, someday it's me. It puts life in the right context. But when we step away from this and then try to give these trite answers so we don't have to think it through, what happens is you don't enter into the suffering that's there, and you definitely don't enter into the suffering of the person who is suffering. So what do you do with the problem of evil? We have 2 messages we're going to do. We're going to do one today, and it's really short, this piece now, and then we're going to introduce the one we're going to do the next piece. There are 2 ways that people tend to look at the issue of evil. There's this traditional perspective, and then another perspective that I want to give you, okay? There's the traditional perspective, and then what I want to call the creation warfare perspective. The perspective that we're looking at primarily today is probably not going to be very popular with you, but it's out there, and a lot of people hold it because they really haven't thought it through. I'm not asking you to accept it, buy it, or reject it, or embrace it. I'm simply asking you to think about these two positions, because the ramifications of whatever position you take are going to hit you all the way through your life. How you deal with evil, how you deal with tragedy. The traditional approach has this, to evil is this. The mystery of evil is the mystery of the hidden purposes of God. Now, we looked at a bunch of passages, we've talked about this biblically already, but one of them is Proverbs 25:2, which says this: it is the glory of God to conceal a matter. And a person holding this position basically says this: everything that happens has basically, it's like this. You come up here, Jerry, stay right there, sit, have a seat. This is how it works. Okay, some of you say, we've done this before, I'll just have you sit in this seat here. It's like this. Whatever comes into Jerry's life, right? Is it Jerry? Okay. So whatever comes into Jerry's life, God's up here. Whatever comes into his life goes through God's hands first. Okay? That means that whatever comes his way, good and bad, God orchestrated it or allowed it. There's a huge debate on those two. But nothing comes into his life that didn't pass through God's hands first. All right? You got me? Traveling? Thanks, Jim. All right? So that's this traditional perspective. Through God's hands first. And so you know, there's a big part of that I do believe myself, and you've heard me say that as well. But what that means is that there is a divine reason for every specific event that occurs in one's life. Whether it be an issue of free will, personal choice, or divine, divine direction. And issues are going to be good and bad, choices are going to be good and bad, things are going to be holy and evil. And from this perspective, everything that happens, circumstance, situation that involves choice or consequence, it's all part of God's divine plan. So, how would a person who embraces that fully view Zosha's tragedy? Well, the thinking is pretty straightforward. First of all, they say God is up in heaven. He looks down and sees what is about to happen. He is there because God is everywhere. And there's a theological term for that God is omnipresent. He is everywhere at all times. Okay? That would be point one. Point two, God sees these two soldiers plotting this evil act to pluck Zosha's eyes out. God knows what they're about to do. He knows everything that has happened in the past, the present, that will happen in the future, because he is omniscient, is another theological term that we believe. God can't intervene. He can stop them from doing that because he's omnipotent and sovereign. Nothing happens without his okay, without his green light. Omnipotent, sovereign. So, God can do anything. He has the power to stop it. But the problem with evil is this: he didn't. Do you see where this gets really confusing? I know this sounds a little philosophical. When you got to trust me, when I opened up this thing, I thought, oh, this is like Pandora's box. This is going to be a fun Sunday. So I want you to know this is a huge issue. And whatever position you take, it's going to have huge ramifications for your life. If you don't think this is playing itself several thousand times over in the Philippines right now, you're on crack. They're saying at least 1,200 people have died. It's going to be up to 12,000. When the tsunamis hit, trust me, there were believers who had faith in Christ who lost their lives or lost family members. That question played out. The Twin Towers. What happened in the Newtown tragedy? We could go over and over again. This plays out. But God doesn't. Therefore, one from this position would probably, and I can say probably because I don't want to put words in the mouth, would say this: if God doesn't stop it, it must be good that God doesn't stop it, because God is all good. So whatever God does or doesn't do, he has a good reason for not doing so. Do you see how that would work? Therefore, Zosha loses her eyes, and it was, and I can say it this way, in that concept, if you take it purely, that it was God's will. Zosha's losing her eyes and then her life was part of a bigger plan. She's what some people would call, use this phrase, collateral damage. You hear that term sometimes in military strikes where they're going after certain people and other people are killed. That's collateral damage. All right? If you remember the story of Uriah, remember Bathsheba, and David has Joab. they were in battle, and they attacked the castle, the fortress, the wall that is strongest, and then they pull away from Uriah, so he will be killed, but it says other men were killed. They were collateral damage. So I want you to know what that means, all right? But it was part of a bigger plan. It was God's will, and His will is done. And somebody might be cynical to add that the world must be a better place for Zosha getting her eyes plucked out. That would be a cynical slam. Now, I say that because if you hold that, that's not a slam. I don't mean that sarcastically. Because I want to be very, very careful here. Because we have said often something else that I believe that really makes all of us really hard to... How about that Romans 8:28 where it says, all things work together for the good of those who love God, who've been called according to His purpose. We believe that too. So do you see where it gets, if you're in, I mean, some of us haven't really thought our theology out, but it's not easy to try to put these, God has His best. Remember where it says, I have come to you, in Jeremiah, I have plans for your life, plans to prosper you, not to harm you, to give you a hope in the future? Yeah. How many times have you read that verse and that didn't make sense where you were standing at that moment? Because it didn't feel like hope, it didn't feel like a future, and it sure does, it feels a whole lot like harm. So I just want you to know there's things that you have to weigh out in this whole thing. Some of you have not had to deal with those. Some of you have dealt with it in the first person. That phrase, all things work together for good, do you think that would have been very difficult for people to embrace in World War II? I had typed up here how many people lost their lives during World War II. Unbelievable. I think it's 7 to 10 people lost because they were fighting men and women. They were killed in battle. Something around 35 to 50 million people who were civilians. Another 10 to 15 million who died of starvation or disease or injuries, whether they be civilians or military. But it's like 55 to 85 million people. That's a lot of folk. If you take concentration camps where you got 7 to 10 million. So do you think that verse would be, all things work together? How do you think that verse would go over if you just put people in the concentration camp? All things work together for the good. That's not going to fly. It's not going to fly when you're standing by the grave of somebody you love. And that's the problem of evil. So whether you're talking about the tragedy of Zosha, the inconceivable horrors within a concentration camp, either way you're going to have to deal with the reality of evil. One must still deal, though, the bottom line with the matter of God being able to stopping it and choosing not to do so. And that's the critical point. You could bicker, we could get in a long discussion about whether God ordained it or allowed it. But whatever choice you make, you've given God the responsibility for doing so. Does that make sense? They're two sides of the same coin. That's the problem of evil. Now, next week we're going to really look at Job, because that book does a great job on this particular issue. But that's the traditional perspective of dealing with the issue of evil. But I want to give you another perspective, and it's called the warfare perspective. I got this from a book, and it's not mine. I like it. And this is what he writes. It's this quote: the mystery of evil is the mystery of the hidden purpose of God. Is the other one. This is it. The mystery of evil is a mystery about the unfathomable, complex, war-torn creation. When evil happens, it's not a mystery about God's character, but a mystery about creation. A creation that is besieged by war. When Adam and Eve, I'm going to put this in real simple terms just to introduce this, and we're not going to go into this at all today, or 2D, for just a minute is all. When man chose to sin, that opened up a whole Pandora of issues. Man was created to have fellowship with man. And once Adam and Eve chose sin, it wasn't man and woman together. It wasn't man and woman. As far as being together as a community, it became divisive. And it became a battle of every man for himself. So when we see evil happen, it's not an issue of the Creator as much as it is an issue of creation. In this perspective, God gave humans and angels free will. And free will is all about us. It's not about God. What we do with free will is about God. We make decisions that have ripple effects. That is, we make decisions that impact people's lives. The complexity of all those decisions coming together make it impossible to trace any kind of intelligible explanation of why one person is killed in a car wreck and another person is not. And if you've ever been in any of those kind of situations, you get, why did this person survive and this one didn't? The mystery of all of that attaches to the creation and not the Creator. We're going to expound on that later. Michael Countryman, you might remember him if you were here 2-3 weeks ago, that he shared his story. Michael went through a time when he lost his sister. And that was the exclamation mark of his life, of things that hadn't gone his way, but that was it. And if you remember, basically said, I gave God the finger. Why? Because he came to the conclusion over here, in traditional perspective, God is in control. Nothing happens without God's permission. God killed my sister. Screw you. Now, sounds irreverent, but that was his position. And he told you, he just went hell-bent. Okay? Because he could not believe in God. I've got a friend who I really like a lot. I love him a lot. He went through a tragedy, and he despises anything that is faith-based, any talk of Jesus, any talk of even religion in any context. He hates it. All right? And I get that. I understand that. He's still mad. But he hasn't been able to deal with the issue yet. So the thing I'm going to put out here simply is this. This issue of evil is complex, but the ramifications of what we choose is profound. Sooner or later in life, you're going to have to deal with that issue. And I don't even sound trite. I hate cliches, but your decision of what you choose to believe is either going to make you bitter or better. It's going to make you a person who enjoys life, or a person who is just angry at life. Just even this week we had a situation occur, and we had somebody who got really angry. I mean, they just were explosive, and you're angry. And what we had to do is we realized, oh my gosh, this issue that this person is super angry about, it's not that big of a deal. And you had to step away and say, there's something else going on here. Have you ever seen the movie, it's the horse racing movie. Somebody help me. Seabiscuit. There's a great piece in Seabiscuit. I realized I had like 20 film clips I wanted to show, but I knew it was going to be long. And so could do that. But Seabiscuit, you remember the jockey is just angry, he's always fighting, and finally the guy who owns the horse sits down and said, what is wrong? What is wrong? No, what is wrong? And you remember that after you asked the question, then the jockey gets really sad and said, can I borrow $20? I got a bad tooth, I don't have any money. I just need some help. And there's this really wonderful, compassionate piece where he realizes he's been torn away from his family. There's all these things going on. He's got this anger. Some of us have a lot of anger because we're really disappointed, as I shared some time ago, a few weeks ago. We started this whole discussion. I was disappointed in God and I got angry. Now, angry and sorrow and just being brokenhearted, that is reality. Do not dismiss that. I even hate to say this, you need to embrace it. Because loss is loss. And it's real. I'm not asking you to be goofy here, to deny that pain. But I'm saying in the midst of pain, you got to choose God. I don't get this. You can be mad at God. I've prayed enough prayers where I've been mad at God. He's kind of big, he can handle that. That's honest dialogue. Have you read the Psalms? But faith is saying, God, I don't get this. This hurts. I'm angry, but I'm trusting you anyway. And the reason I think faith, I don't know how, life is hard with faith. I don't know how you would deal with tragedy without it. Because here you got hope, and you're not alone. Over here you got despair, and this is all there is. And I've lived in both places. I like it over here better. I want to give you a verse to close with. And I want to give you this verse because we didn't have much we're going to get into the text and the scriptures later, but I want to give you this verse that's in this book, but I wrote it down because I was looking for a verse that would encourage you kids. This is really, oh, thank you for lifting me up. You know, sometimes people, when you come to church, don't you want encouragement? This wasn't one of those Sundays, okay? And sometimes I want to hand it all together, put a nice bow on it, give a kiss, and then everybody's, and one of those, like, and this is unresolved for you. There's a tension here that's unresolved. In a way, it's on purpose. Because I want you to start thinking through this issue where you land on it. Okay? But I love this verse. And I've got to find it. And I'm not going to find it. Because I didn't write it down. Turn. I'll give you this other verse. This is, sorry, peoples. It's here, I promise. But I want to give you a verse to hold on to. And I've already quoted it a little bit. But I'm going to go ahead and give you another rendition of it. You ever do that? Listen, I got 13 pages here, and I put it at the bottom of my pile. Okay. I close with this verse. Okay? God's speaking to you. Do not be afraid, for I redeemed you. I've called you by your name, and you are mine. You are precious in my eyes. You are honored, and I love you. The mountains may move, the hills disappear, but even there, my faithful love for you will remain. My covenant of peace with you will never be broken. You're not alone. That's what I want to give you. This whole matter of evil, if you have faith in Christ, you are not alone. If you don't have Christ, He waits. There's hope, and there's life. There's second chances. Let's pray. Hey God, that was a really long discussion. And really just a philosophical view of this whole matter of evil and its existence. And all of us have struggled with that question in all kinds of different ways already in our life. It doesn't matter if we're 14, it doesn't matter if we're 40, it doesn't matter if we're 75. We deal with this issue day in and day out. When we see tragedy happen, when we experience loss in our lives, when we're disappointed that things didn't go our way. And this whole matter is, do we trust you? Do we trust you when life hurts and makes no sense at all? And we choose to believe. So God, help us to hold on to that promise. And help us to begin to think through what it is that we really believe, because all of faith, all of Scripture needs to become a biography. And it needs to be true in our lives. We pray this in Christ's name. Amen.